Carol is set in the early 1950s in New York, and it follows the unexpected love affair between two women of different ages and different social settings. Therese Belivet, in her early 20s, who's embarking on her life, meets Carol Aird, who's this alluring woman who's beginning to go through a divorce, single mother. I mean, a mother of one daughter, and what happens between these two women, and at this very unlikely time in historically for a love affair of this kind. It's based on Patricia Highsmith's second novel, The Price of Salt. I actually had never read The Price of Salt. I didn't even know about The Price of Salt when this project came to me. I was, corrected by my lesbian friends that it was a seminal lesbian novel that I should have known about. But in fact, The Price of Salt was published under an assumed name during Patricia Highsmith's life under the name of Claire Morgan, and is historic and noteworthy for the fact that it ended with a sort of atypically affirmative ending, which was not the norm for lesbian-themed stories at the time. And she ultimately did publish the novel. It came out in the 1980s again while she was still alive under her name as Carol. It's a fantastic novel by Patricia Highsmith, the only novel outside the crime milieu of her career. But what it does is it sort of explores the subjectivity of Therese, the younger character in the story, with the same kind of fixed attention that she usually applies to her criminal subjects, and draws a unique parallel to the sort of festering mind of somebody falling in love to that of the criminal mind. And so crime and the whole sense of this love being an illicit love lurks through the story, and ultimately propels the women to take some actions at the end of the story that they wouldn't have otherwise. Unrequited love is definitely an aspect of the story, in that Therese is trying to sort of read the signs and signals from this person who she is becoming attracted to and getting to know. And Carol is a mercurial figure in the story, and she's hard to read, and she's conflicted. And what you realize is that love, particularly between women at this time, gay love, it's love without an example. And so these women are really struggling to make sense of what this means, how seriously to take it, how much it should alter the decisions of their lives. And but it also, because it's a pre-Stonewall kind of period for gay representation, and particularly for lesbian representation, which was almost an unimaginable subject at the time, you really see the story of a young person almost inventing love and trying to kind of find their own language for what this love could be, and what kind of a hold it's going to ultimately take on their lives. And I love that about it. I thought that was so interesting and made it more than just things were so much harder than movie. Really that there was something radical and original about the kind of love that they were exploring, despite the challenges and the hardships that they faced. Cate Blanchett was attached to play Carol when the script and the project first came to me. I'd worked with Cate in my Bob Dylan-inspired film, I'm Not There, and she famously transformed into the electric Dylan of 1966 in a shape-shifting performance that still astounds me and people who see the film. So I was so excited to work with Cate again and to see how she could pull it off as a woman this time. And it's a really, I say that jokingly, but it's a different kind of femininity. It's a different kind of possibilities of being a woman and the choices and the options of being a woman at this particular time. And I think you see in her character of Carol, somebody who followed the sort of prescribed path of what you're supposed to do and who you're supposed to be, and made all the right choices and married the wealthy, handsome investment banker, and had a child and settled down in the wealthy suburbs of New Jersey. But all of a sudden realizes that there's been things in her life that she's avoided, and she has not been fulfilled in this relationship that you learn about that she had with a very close friend, Abby, was one indication of that. And at this particularly critical, shifting time of her life, she meets this young girl who's really out of her orbit. And she learns a great deal about herself in the process of getting to know Therese. Rooney, who I'd never worked with before and had only seen in films and admired and heard great things about from other directors who'd worked with her, is just an impeccable talent. She really understood and beautifully calibrates that journey that this character takes. And I really think you see somebody within the course of sort of a 6 to 8 month span that the film addresses, growing up in front of your eyes and changing into somebody else. And beginning with a sense of openness and innocence and a kind of radical openness to love and what it might bring, and who ultimately gets wounded as a result and changes. And you see how love, on the one hand, can open us up, and then it can shut us down. And we, in some ways, are never the same after some of these experiences, and we learn from them. So the Therese that you meet at the beginning of the film and the Therese that you meet at the end are two different women. And so Rooney had an incredibly subtle and beautiful way of understanding that and portraying it. Gerhardt is somebody who one understands grew up with Carol, and they come from the same sort of social milieu, and one suspects that there was an infatuation from the beginning on Abby's part toward this beautiful, remarkable woman who eventually marries Harge and has a child with Harge. But we also learned that Abby and Carol had a furniture store together and had a project. And it was during this time, that Carol's marriage began to unravel, that she and Abby had an affair. And it was short-lived, but it obviously has made a profound mark on both women. And Sarah Paulson brings a profound, poignant understanding, I think, of this history to the character, and you see it in that face, and somewhere in between those sort of lozenge eyes and bee-stung mouth of Sarah, there's a deep history there, and complicated feelings of love and regret, but ultimately a friendship that will survive. Harge is somebody who I think in the course of the months that this film chronicles is encountering feelings for his wife that he may never have known he had under the duress and the pressure of Carol truly deciding to move on in her life. So I think somebody he always just assumed would always be there. He's reevaluating the meaning of in his world. So it was a challenging role for an actor to be able to show you something that doesn't really depict who he's been in the past. The sort of intensity of his feelings and the need to express them to her is something he only recently has come to understand in himself. And it coincides with Carol's meeting of Therese and being pulled in a very different direction. So Kyle Chandler, who is such a gifted actor, such a real powerhouse of an actor, I think, sort of navigates that world and brings a sort of unexpected level of sympathy to what could very easily be an unsympathetic character in the story, and I think is treated a little more harshly in the novel. And so it's balanced by this person who's both, vulnerable for the first time to the woman in his life, but also angry and confused. And I think you feel that conflict and that inability to completely reconcile the circumstances that he's confronting as a man at this time. He also just looks so perfect in the period. He is built for the 1950s, Kyle, and he's also an incredibly congenial and lovely presence on set. Just a really lovely guy to work with. So it was a pleasure. We're very lucky we had him. In this film, more than other films I've made where I've drawn from and paid keen attention to the cinema of a particular period that my film is set in. On this one, we really were looking more at the period photography that we encountered. Everything from photojournalism to art photography to advertisement from the early 1950s. And what you find, remarkably, is that there were a lot of women behind the camera at this time. Ruth Orkin, Helen Levitt, Vivian Meyer, Esther Bublé were all active chroniclers of New York City in the early 50s, and many of them in color, in this sort of beautifully muted palettes, this kind of soft, soiled color palette that we really tried to bring to the visual sensibility of the film, both in the design elements and in the cinematography and lighting. And we shot the film on Super 16, which Ed and I used on Mildred Pierce. And I love that because it sort of more aggressively reinstates the cinematic grain. To be shooting on film is rare these days to begin with, but to really preserve the grain of celluloid in the era of high-speed stocks and lenses, which diminish grain so to such a strong degree. This really looks like a film from the time that we were conveying. So that was also cool to kind of have the small camera body and do it in some ways with that sort of guerrilla sensibility that we all came out of. It's certainly a film about lesbian love. It's a film about a kind of homosexual love that was even more taboo and more repudiated at this particular time than love between men. But I also think it's a film that's about the radicality of love to begin with, and in that way, it's something everybody can relate to. Those unincorporated, random, sort of incoherent feelings that you try to assemble into some meaning